Jericho. What a name, right? It just echoes with these ancient, epic, almost mythic stories. And for most of us, hearing it conjures up one particular story.
That's the one. The story of Joshua, the Israelites, the blaring trumpets, and the spectacular, miraculous collapse of Jericho's mighty walls. It's probably one of the most famous stories from the Old Testament.
But is that it? Is that the whole story? A city that's only famous for how it was destroyed? Well, let's dig in, because what archaeologists have found under the dust of Jericho is a story that's so much older and, frankly, so much more amazing than any legend.
To get to that story, we have to put down the ancient text for a minute and pick up the tools of modern science. Specifically, we're heading into the world of archaeology.
Now, you should know that archaeology itself has changed a lot. It's not about those swashbuckling treasure hunters anymore, the ones who basically bulldozed through history to find gold. Modern archaeology is a careful, painstaking science. It's all about layers, slowly and meticulously peeling back time to see how people really lived.
And that brings us to our key figure, Kathleen Kenyon. In 1951, she showed up at Jericho, at this ancient mound called Tel El Sultan, and she was armed with all these new scientific techniques. Her goal was to take a fresh look at the story of Joshua's walls, but this time using cutting-edge tools like radiocarbon dating. So for 6 years, her team dug deep into that ancient mound. They were pretty sure they were going to find something that would finally put the biblical story into a clear historical context. But what they actually found? Well, it would completely rewrite the history books, not just for Jericho, but for all of human civilization. Because what Kenyon unearthed was a Jericho that was just unimaginably ancient, so much older than any story about trumpets and falling walls. And this timeline, this really puts the sheer scale of it all into perspective. It's kind of mind-blowing. Look, all the way on the left, that's when Jericho's tower was built, around 9000 BC. That's 2,000 years before people even invented pottery. It's almost 6,000 years before writing, and more than 6,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza. The timescale is just staggering.
So the key takeaway here is we're talking about a settlement that first began 11,000 years ago. This is right after the last ice age ended. To put that in perspective, woolly mammoths were still roaming the earth. It's that ancient. And this is what those ancient people built. A massive stone tower, 28 feet high, with its own internal staircase. People have estimated it took about 11,000 days of labor to construct. This wasn't just some small fort. This was the first piece of massive communal architecture in all of human history.
And that, right there, is the central mystery. Why? Why would a community of early farmers and hunters, a society that hadn't invented pottery or writing yet, dedicate so much time and effort to building something this enormous?
The people who did this, we call them the pre-pottery Neolithic A culture. They lived in these simple, round houses with sunken floors. But what's really fascinating is that, unlike later cities, there's absolutely no evidence of kings or a powerful priest class forcing them to build it. It seems like the whole community just decided to do it together.
So what was life actually like for these pioneers of city living? Well, the artifacts they left behind help us piece together a surprisingly detailed picture of their world. Their life was this amazing mix of the old and the new. They were still hunting wild animals. Gazelle was a huge part of their diet, but they were also some of the world's very first farmers, growing crops like wheat and barley. And they were traders too. They imported this super sharp volcanic rock called obsidian all the way from what is now Turkey.
But maybe the most personal, most intimate glimpse we have into their lives comes from how they treated their dead. It reveals this fascinating and deeply mysterious ritual that they practiced.
So get this. After a person died, their skull was sometimes removed from the body. Then it was filled with clay, and plaster was carefully molded over it to recreate their actual face, with little shells placed in the eye sockets. These are some of the world's very first portraits, and they were kept inside people's homes. It seems to have been this incredibly powerful way of honoring their ancestors, of keeping their loved ones physically present.
So, let's bring this all back together. We started out with a famous myth about destruction, but the reality that science has uncovered is a story of creation and incredible innovation. Which, of course, brings us back to our original question. What about Joshua's walls, the ones the trumpet supposedly knocked down?
Well, the walls from that time period, the Middle Bronze Age, were found by Kathleen Kenyon to be really eroded, or in her own words, disappointingly non-existent. The truly massive walls, the ones connected to that ancient tower, were already thousands of years old by Joshua's time. And many archaeologists now believe they probably weren't even built for war, but to protect the town from flash floods.
And that's really the ultimate takeaway here. The legend is about one single moment of destruction. But the reality? The reality is so much bigger. Jericho is a story of human creativity, of a community that figured out city living and massive construction projects right at the dawn of civilization.
For decades, everyone thought Jericho's tower was a total one-off, the oldest of its kind on Earth. Then, just recently, at a site in Syria called Tel Carmel, archaeologists found 5 towers that might be 2,000 years older. It just leaves you with this final thought. If one discovery can completely rewrite history overnight, what other incredible secrets about our own beginnings are still out there, buried right under our feet, just waiting to be found?